You can see my screen, right?
You can see it.
Yeah, awesome. Let's go. So I thought I'd start this with a little bit of a story about Index Coop's history. So Index Coop was created in October 2020 by this marriage between DeFi Pulse, which is like the Bloomberg of crypto, and Set Labs, which is like an engineering technology infrastructure team. And our vision was to build Web3 financial products that bring prosperity to everyone. So we were born between this marriage between these two very different entities. I sort of see DeFi Pulse is like a kid at the back of behind the bike chair smoking a fag, and Set Labs is prefect, front of the class. So very different founding entities. And initially, Index Coop was really just conceived as this sort of growth and marketing function for these two organizations. Also, the ability to create a token, you can liquidity mine and incentivize some of these index products we were launching. But the beauty of a DAO is DAOs take on a life of their own very, very quickly. And so we, over the course of about 9 months, transitioned from being just this growth and marketing team to building our own product team, our own engineering team, finance team, people team, a fully formed functioning DAO. And as we went on this process of really maturing, we started to become ready to take the keys to the car. Instead of it being, Set Labs and DeFi Pulse providing that direction, we as a DAO felt we should be empowered to start making those decisions for us. We want the keys to the car. We want to be able to actually go out and steer our direction. And this resulted in our community embarking on this transformation leveling up process that we called Index 2.0. And it was basically saying, look, if we really want autonomy, if we really want to steer our own direction, there's some big topics we as a community need to come together and address. So leadership and governance. Peter Pan was speaking earlier. A lot of this stuff is relevant to Index Coop about how can we ensure we're moving as one community in a direction? How can we ensure we're really making decisions that are going to equip us for the future? So that's one. The second one was around how does a DAO actually deal with third parties and methodologies? How do you conduct a fee split negotiation in a fully public way where in a DAO there's lots of different voices? That's two. Second big issue. How do you ensure financial sustainability? How do you ensure diversity and inclusion as well? Really important, especially when we see this sort of, we have this open door for DAOs for anyone to get involved. How do we ensure that is actually creating an open, transparent, diverse system? And this last point is the one I'm going to focus on here around compensation and community ownership. How do we get that right at Index Coop? And how do we actually build long-term community ownership? And this is part of a broader compensation piece, which I'll not get into because 20 minutes is super short, even for just the one piece. But we're going to focus here on the dynamic staking model. And it comes really about, because we have to address this issue where Index Coop contributors have less than 2% of ownership in the protocol as it stands. And I did not quit my day job to come and work to enrich a bunch of VCs and early investors and DPI farmers. I came to really take ownership in the protocol. And we had this bizarre Genesis allocation where Set, DeFi Pulse, they have a big chunk of community ownership. They get this methodologist reward, and then we had, and I always say, a community treasury, which we didn't own. We were using it to pay legal fees and exchange listing fees, and that's not a community treasury. That's not for contributors, and still, the actual contributors had less than 2%. So how do we fix it? How do we fix community ownership, but also use ownership as a way to attract and attain key talent in this sort of white hot labor market, jobs market we have in the DAO space? And it's not just about paying people more, okay? That's a very traditional approach. What it is actually about separating two different aspects out that really lead to community ownership. So the first is total allocation, like how much are you actually putting towards your community, your contributors, to support them and actually grow that pie. But the second one, which I think often is missed, is are the community actually keeping the tokens you give them? If you give a bunch of tokens and then it just gets dumped on market, that's not a sustainable way of building community ownership, and it's not good for the organization as a whole. So when we're designing this dynamic staking model, what we were really focusing in on is this factor called the allocation retention rate. So what percentage of the amount you give to contributors is actually retained by contributors? Because through that, you can actually then build that sustainable long-term community ownership. So that brings us to the DSM. Eduardo, do you want to take it away?
Thanks, Joe. And given everything that Joe covered, this is literally the output of months of conversation and discussion around this. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you and I first started addressing this end of September, maybe even as early as August. But yeah, so the DSM stands for Dynamic Staking Model. And we believe at least that this should be an elegant solution to some of these challenges that Joe mentioned. And to give you sort of a quick summary on the next slide, Joe, if you mind flipping. Thanks. The DSM really has two goals. We wanted to incentivize increased impact from key contributors, but at the same time, we wanted to incentivize increased ownership of index tokens by those contributors, as Joe mentioned, to increase that allocation retention. So we were trying to figure out a way to do this. As you can see on the right, our members' impact is recognized by increased OWL levels. So you start off with no level and you become a copper, you bronze, you progress. And it's really a way to denote who are the highest impact individuals in the community. And as you'll see later, under the DSM, there is now an incentive for people to actually get to higher levels. The other thing we wanted to incentivize was having what we call skin in the game, holding more index tokens, because if your actions then promote a higher success for the community, which then leads into a higher price of the token, then you're aligning incentives. So we wanted to not just bring more high quality talent, but also incentivize alignment of outcomes. So on the next slide, following from these comments, you can see that the top right chart, increased impact is as recognized by increased OWL levels, earns higher rewards. And the bottom chart, you'll actually notice that under DSM, the returns earned for staking decline with increased token holdings. So not that say that the absolute number of the reward goes down, just that as a percentage gain. So it's a little bit different than what you're used to in traditional staking models. And the reason for that is we were trying to go for equality of opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Excuse me. We wanted to be fairly transparent with everyone on the call. So this table summarizes the DSM. As you can see, higher level contributors going across the top right, across the columns, and contributors with higher financial skin in the game going down the rows earn the most rewards. And in a sentence, the desire is to be down and to the right. We're trying to incentivize people to have high impact, high alignment of incentives in order to benefit the community. Because if we have high impact contributors, we get a higher brain share from high quality individuals to move the ball forward. But at the same time, by having higher skin in the game, we're more aligning incentives. And at the same time, it helps reduce sell pressure. So you might be sitting here thinking, so what? Why is this important? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit different to traditional staking because at the end of the day, this is a closed system. It's not open to anyone. If I'm not a member of the community, I can't come in, buy a bag of index and just stake it. I have to have a verified role. I have to be a contributor that is helping move the ball forward for the community. So this is literally designed for the benefit of the community, not just to give more ownership to people that have no interest in it. As I mentioned, there's that declining rate of return for high holdings because that helps encourage equity, helps incentivize new joiners to get involved, start contributing because they see that their contributions are rewarded. And but as I mentioned earlier, also that we want to increase the amount of talent and treasurer devoted to this. We also want to increase the commitment because as you earn these rewards, they are locked in time. You don't just get them every month. You earn it, but then there's a delay of a few months before you get it. So it also promotes people being engaged over longer periods of time. So as I like to talk about it, there are 3 ways you can commit to a protocol by committing your time, your treasure, or your talent. The dynamic staking model is designed to hit all 3 of those. But coming back to the point I made a moment ago, this provides equality of opportunity. And again, not equality of outcome. I want to be very precise. Talk about equality of opportunity. Anyone has the opportunity to build meaningful stake in the protocol. Any person can join, have impact, and be able to benefit from having impact and alignment of incentives. And for this, where you might ask, so where are we with this? And for this, I'll let Joe kind of provide the nice summary.
Yes, and just before I do, one thing to add, and why we called it the dynamic staking model, was that we're effectively carving out a percentage of community ownership that we're going to be delivering through this model every year. And the beauty of that is then, because you're providing that ownership based on impact and skin in the game, if you've got contributors that are looking to, cash out, sell the tokens they get, every month as it comes in, over time, you'll progressively reallocate to those with the highest retention rate, i.e. those with the most skin in the game, the longest term view, those who are sort of most committed for the long term of the protocol. And that's how you can then get your allocation retention rate higher and higher over time because of that mechanism of constantly sort of readjusting. So where are we? Going from 2% ownership to 22.5% ownership for contributors is taking some time to work through. We have like 10 VCs. We've walked it through with them. We've got rounds of community feedback. Compensation and ownership is one of the hardest topics to navigate with the DAO. But we have just shared the final proposal with the community, and it's received really broad support, which means that come next Monday, we are going to be going live with this as a formal governance proposal. All of our sort of key stakeholders are bought in and aligned around this. And so for Index Coop, this is probably one of the most major steps we as a group has taken towards actual real ownership of our protocol since launch, which is exciting for me and Eduardo and everyone else in the community. But that's our last slide. So I would love any questions, thoughts, comments, feedback in this remaining 5 minutes.
Any questions? I think Livy dropped a question. Is the token non-transferable?
No, the index token will be transferable, but you'll effectively withdraw it from the dynamic staking model if you want to cash out those returns. We're looking at different options to our levels as non-transferable NFTs, and then actually building like a more rigorous actually on-chain system behind it. But all of that will come. If that addresses the question.
But how would you keep it from people to buying it if it's transferable? Like, how could you avoid a secondary market?
Well, yeah. The token is tradable on the secondary market, but the accessibility to participate in the dynamic staking model is not open to all participants. That's why it's driven by the OWL level. So, Livia, if you can go out, buy the token, but you can't deposit it into the staking model unless you have an OWL level. Once you have the OWL level that allows you to participate, then you can definitely stake your tokens and earn the rewards. But again, the token is fungible, but it's gated to the high impact contributors, because as I mentioned before, we want to incentivize and reward people whose incentives are aligned with the community and who are helping the community go to the next level, not just to allow someone to come in, buy a bag, and just benefit from it passively.
And just one thing to add, it's somewhat permissionless as well, which means that we previously tried this system where we had full-time contributors and everyone else, and full-time got this vesting package, it got this like awesome deal, but that meant that who was in that in circle was just decided by a small group of people, and that created constant tension and friction within our community, whereas this allows every contributor of all stripes to build that ownership sort of based on their skin in the game and the impact and contribution to the Coop.
So the one takeaway, equality of opportunity. That's what we're trying to promote here. And that's what was at the heart of what Joe and I have been working on for the past few months.
I have a question, if there's nothing else. How do you, because we had this topic in the course of today, how do you define the different levels? Just briefly, it's not directly related with dynamic staking, but.
Yeah, it's a critical next question. So we have these loosely defined levels based on the sort of role individuals play within the community, say like working group lead, index council, which are elected positions, etc. But what we're going to be doing in the new year is effectively trying a number of different parallel processes to do owl levels and seeing what works and what doesn't. So looking at, can we use coordinate circles to actually quantify impact and do it based off that? Can we use like a small delegated group to look at like behavioral or contribution related factors, which I'm personally less keen on, and then just opening it up for other community members to propose these different systems. We can run effectively as many different experiments simultaneously as we want, and then we can decide, right, this is what we like the most. And I'm very in favor of a more permissionless system for doing it.
Okay, and Mark's comment or question is probably related. How is high value assessed?
Exactly. So that's a really difficult question. If you do it in a centralized way, you can do it based on just, I mean, we have like objectives and individual targets and different groups that work towards it. But we think that a more like bottoms up community led assessment of impact is the way to go. Yeah, that's our view, but it is a really difficult question to do right, hence the need for multiple different experiments.
And it also depends on role within the DAO. Because at the end of the day, if you're in like, let's say a business development function, it's a lot easier to measure impact if you land a large relationship that has a defined sort of reward associated with it. But to Joe's point, some other things are more nuanced. So how do you measure increased governance or increased community ownership? Those are not necessarily straightforward so like when Joe and I have been working on this Index 2.0 project, how do you measure high impact in that particular element? So again, it is community driven.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Any final questions? Peter, do we have anything else in the YouTube chat? Don't miss it.
I dropped them in the chat.
Can you just read it?
Yeah, sure. From Gideon, we have, do you have more information on what goes into the different OWL levels? And from Petra, is there a way to look at OWLs as layers, not levels?
So I think the first question we broadly covered. I guess you could look at those OWL levels like layers in a way, and it's the higher OWL levels is about impact, it's about trust, it's about time with the community, and all of those factors come together to sort of broadly try and show how people progress within our community. That's how I see them. And final, just a request, if anyone is interested by this, building it, implementing it, rolling it out, trying it with your communities, whatever, I will share my details in the chat. It's Pepperoni Joe.
Yeah, we distributed your Twitter accounts and also the link to the proposal if you guys would like to further explore and take a look at it. Thanks so much, Eduardo and Joe, for sharing
You're
this
welcome.
today.
And so he's Pepperoni Joe. I put my name for Discord and Twitter on there so you have it. And yeah, the last thing I wanted to add to what Joe mentioned about the OWL levels, it's also a signaling mechanism. Because if you see someone as, let's say, a gold versus a silver, it also highlights that they have a different degree of context and impact within the community. So you know that when you're speaking with, let's say, a gold versus a silver, that there's a sort of an expectation of what that gold is doing for the community. So it also helps as that signaling mechanism.